Is there a more fraught thing in this world than family? I debated what channel to put this video on once I decided I wanted to talk about it. By nature of the topic, it would probably be a little more at home on the Vera Wild channel, but it felt more fitting to put here because these are thoughts, perspectives that I kind of want to have a better chance at hitting a broad audience. Not that I don't want a broad audience to watch the Vera Wild channel. I do, but they don't. So here we are. There was something that made the news cycle a few days ago at time of recording, and that is that Elon Musk's transgender daughter, who has disowned him, Vivian Wilson, made some comments on Blue Sky that clicked a few things in my head. What she said basically amounted to part of the reason Musk rejected her so vehemently was that, according to her, he uses IVF, in vitro fertilization, specifically to try and help ensure that he has as many boys as possible. And with Vivian transitioning to become a woman, well, that's not just a matter of her becoming something he doesn't approve of. She ruined his investment. He paid for a boy, and now he doesn't have one. Now, let's be clear about a few things. At the time that I'm speaking, it is unconfirmed if Musk actually does use IVF partially for the purpose of ensuring that he has boys. That having been said, that is one, fairly consistent with a lot of his ideology. He has talked before about how he feels it is very important that certain kinds of people have as many children as possible, and he appears to live that. And just by simple biology, if you want to ensure maximum offspring, as many boys as possible is better for that end, because girls can only have a new offspring, or several if it's twins or triplets or whatever, every 9 months, a little less than a year. Boys can impregnate a new person every single day if they're really ambitious about it. So if you're trying to spread genes as far as possible, boys are more effective for that. And the other thing is, for the 14 children that Musk has, 13 were assigned male at birth. And while certainly not impossible to happen naturally, it is statistically unlikely. And of course, we do know he uses IVF. That is a known thing. What isn't clear is whether or not he has sex assigned as part of that. As a practice that is legal in the United States, it is not legal in many other places that have IVF for the very obvious eugenics flavor that it carries. When you start enabling that sort of customization of offspring, it brings, well, some unpleasant connotations to just the idea of ensuring certain genes get passed on and other ones don't. That degree of tinkering with the child that will result from IVF is something that many, many countries don't allow. The US does. That's not to say it is controversy-free over here. Again, eugenics. But it is allowed, and it is legal. And the other thing is that it would explain part of his vitriol. Because the thing is, if it was just a matter of he didn't like trans people and he was just mad at her for being trans in the abstract, that wouldn't make sense. It also wouldn't fit the timeline because she started her transition at, I believe, 16. He had to sign off on it. Now, he claims now that he was tricked into that, which she's been very upfront that, like, no, he knew. He just he didn't fully internalize, what it was that he was losing yet. And there's also possibly the complicating factor that one of his spouses, I forget which one, in fact, left him and started dating a trans woman, which may have exacerbated things. Of course, at this point, Musk claims to have, quote unquote, lost his son to the woke mind virus. Here's the thing. This isn't actually about Elon Musk. What I want to talk about is how this exemplifies an issue of toxic parenting that is not unique to transphobic parents. And in fact, maybe more the cause of transphobia than an actual distaste for trans people. What do I mean by this? Well, there is a certain kind of parent who views their offspring, their children, as above all an extension of themselves, or possibly even as their property. There are parents out there who do not view their children as their own independent person. And this manifests in many ways. You can think of the stage parents, many of whom have their own thwarted ambitions of stage, of dance, of pageantry, and they push their children into it. Similarly, you can get this with sports. You will have, usually in this case, fathers who really had sports ambitions, but maybe they suffered a high school injury, maybe they didn't get the scholarship, what have you, and then they really push their kids, usually sons, to go as hard as possible into these sports. It can manifest as a presumed authority over things like wedding arrangements. If you want a recent example of this kind of possessiveness, something like the so-called doormat mom, if you're not familiar with that whole thing, here's a video by Savvy Writes Books, which is a pretty good breakdown of what went on there. But short version, this is a woman who, because her children have made their own decisions independent of her, and she doesn't like some of them, she has opted to brand her children as ungrateful and horrible children because they aren't doing what she wants. These are, I'll stress, adult children. Another way that this can manifest is with some of the scandals that have happened around so-called family vloggers, people who treat their kids more like they are abusive bosses to employees and less like actual parents. This can often come before transphobia, and transphobia becomes an extension of this. I think actually Brennan Lee Mulligan may have summed it up best when he said,
on the level of individuals and civilizations, personality predates ideology. Meaning, before you were a fascist, you were a bully and an asshole.
Before you were a transphobe who threw your transgender child out of the house for being trans, you were the kind of parent who was willing to throw their child out of the house. You were that first. The transphobia was just the reason. It's a fairly heated topic. First of all, if you know statistics, you know that trans teens are among the most likely to be homeless as they are thrown out of their homes and left to fend for themselves for exerting their own autonomy over their life, their body, their future. And while I'm not going to say that none of this just amounts to garden variety extreme transphobia, I think it's probably far more common that what a lot of these parents who throw their kids out are actually upset about is that their extension of themselves that they saw, this thing that was theirs to mold, isn't doing what it's supposed to do. And to those who view their children as their property, as somebody who bought a specific kind of child through IVF might view them, well, this isn't just a disruptive or disobedient or strong-willed independent child. This is a defective product. This is ruining their investment of time and money and effort. There are parents out there who, when their children are not what those parents had planned for them, those parents turn very, very nasty, and they quickly find that they don't have a lot of use for those kids. Oh, you're not going to be what I was molding you to be, what I'd planned for you to be? I don't need you then. I found this a helpful couple of dots to connect because, speaking as someone who has a supportive mother and who is also a parent, it's always been difficult for me to fully wrap my head around the idea of cutting off your kid, especially throwing like a teenager out of the house over something like this. I can understand, I don't appreciate or particularly sympathize with, but I can understand being confused, frustrated, even scared or angered by a child transitioning if you don't really understand what that entails, what that means. But cutting them off made no sense to me. Why wouldn't you at the very least try to understand? It's because I think in a lot of these cases, these are parents who were willing to cut their child off for any number of reasons. And while I've been blessed to never have a parent in my life who did treat me that way, I have witnessed it. I have seen parents turn on their children the instant those children so much as made a decision without consulting them, to say nothing of leading a life that is something that the parent wouldn't approve of. And the parent makes no effort to understand. They get angry and they lash out. And eventually, usually somebody cuts somebody off. Now, I also want to be clear. I don't want to remove any possibility of the child, and I want to emphasize in this case of what I'm generally talking about, adult child being the problem, for lack of a better way to put it. I am on record as saying that if there is somebody who is truly toxic to your life, I don't care what the biological connection is. I do not feel you are obligated to them. And I do include adult grown children in that. If you have a child who is grown, who is an adult, who can take care of themselves, but who is deeply toxic and hurtful and harmful to your life, you are within your rights to cut them off. Now, I think by and large, it doesn't usually go that direction. Generally, when there is no contact between child and adult, it is usually the offspring cutting off the parent. And certainly when a child is in fact a child and not yet an adult, the power balance very much tips in favor of the parent, and in a way that is abusable. Not necessarily abusive, but certainly abusable. But once that child is an adult, they are fully capable of being toxic and abusive to their parents. And I don't want to pretend like that never happens, but if we can be honest about the direction that this usually goes, then we should realize that's not really an area worth dwelling on. Now, I don't want to get lost in the quagmire of armchair diagnosing anyone. I see terms like narcissist thrown around very liberally on the internet, and I'm not going to say in any specific case that it is or isn't true, but I am going to say I am not a psychiatrist. I suspect you probably aren't either, and if you are one, then you should know that it's unethical of you to diagnose someone that you have not actually had a direct interaction with. So I don't like to even open the door to that kind of armchair diagnosis. But I do wonder if maybe better understanding that in a lot of these instances, of parents cutting off their children for being trans, that we're not talking about perfect ideal parents. Well, first of all, if we're being honest, perfect ideal parents don't exist. But if we were to actually stop and examine a lot of these relationships, actually, I would say most of these relationships, I would be very, very, very surprised if we found really any instances of a perfectly healthy and unproblematic and uncontrolling relationship that would have been perfect were it not for one party coming out as trans. If it weren't for that damn transphobia, this would be a perfect child and parent relationship. I don't think that's going to be the case. To speak briefly about my own mother, her understanding of trans issues isn't amazing. I mean, it's not. Either in terms of the experience that we go through, why we do what we do, and what life is like for us. But she has tried to understand and tried to learn because she loves me. And whatever I am, so long as I'm not hurting people and I'm not doing anything like that, she wants to care about me and wants to love me and wants to understand me to the best of her ability. And that's how I was raised, and that's how I try to be to my own kid. And it's what somewhat naively for a while I thought all parents did. But as I said, I've seen from personal experience that that is not true. There are parents out there who think of their kids only as part of themselves, only as an extension of them, as a representation of them, as something that belongs to them. But when that thing that you feel you own and is yours breaks and doesn't do what it's supposed to do, well, what do you do with a defective product? You throw it out. And while some parents will flat out eject their children, others will remain harmfully, tragically toxic and try to cling on hard into the lives of their adult children, and those children may have to be the one who cuts them off, because if all you're ever going to do is berate someone for not being what you wanted them to be, why would they keep you around? I've said before, when it comes to family relationships, like, if the only reason you have for keeping somebody connected to you is because they're family, and there's literally no other reason, like if this was an acquaintance, if this was a friend, if there was no blood relation, if you would have cut them off, then that to me is the answer. Once we are talking about adults, I don't think being family gets you special treatment. But being family, and specifically being a parent, also doesn't give you special rights to control your children, especially when they're adults. And you certainly don't have the right to lash out and call them dead and claim they are lost to some woke mind virus. That's beyond petty. That's deeply, horrifyingly, tragically sad. And the thing about Vivian Wilson is she doesn't seem to especially enjoy excessive attention. Like, she'll post on Instagram and Blue Sky intermittently, but it was surprisingly hard to get more than just a couple of pictures of her. She doesn't actually seem to want this attention, but she has to say something. Otherwise, her father, who demonstrably hates her, controls the narrative. Oh, and quick sidebar, when Vivian Wilson comes up in the news, any and every news outlet that can't report on her without listing her dead name Stop it. It's not relevant to the story. It never is. Sorry. Personal pet peeve, and something that I come across more often than I should. What can you do? I'll bitch about it. That's what I can do, and that's what I did. I think the reason that I really wanted to make this is that I think we need to understand that while transphobia is a problem, it is often an outgrowth of another deeper problem. And it is often an indicator of many, many other issues. It can be used as a wedge issue. It's how we have dealt with a lot of the rise of the alt-right, as they turned trans people in our existence into a wedge issue. And there is more than ample evidence of the use of attempts to regulate transness as also a roundabout way of controlling women, whether it be legally or through just society. Because if you're going to start harassing someone who you think is trans for going into the women's room, well, suddenly any woman who doesn't look sufficiently feminine starts getting harassed. And the message behind that is stop looking masculine. Be girlier. Be more feminine. Be the thing we said you're supposed to be. Let us control you. There's a reason we see so many transphobes cozying up to organizations like the Heritage Foundation, which has as its mission to specifically restrict women's rights, cozying up to literal neo-Nazis in some case. Transphobia is an extension of what some people either already believe or are willing to become so that they can continue to feel in control. Many people who are transphobic, actually I would say most people who are transphobic, are not only transphobic. They're going to play host to many other bigotries, and in terms of transphobic parents who reject and eject their children, they were already toxic parents. They were already controlling. They already wanted their child to behave in a very specific way. And they became transphobic because the way in which that child defied them was, or at least in their mind defied them, was by becoming trans. Of course, the reality is trans is a thing that we are. It's not a thing that we become or that we choose to do out of defiance. But for a parent like that, that's a distinction without a difference if they even make the distinction. So many of these problems run far, far deeper than just not liking trans people. Yeah, sure. There are some people out there who just don't like trans people. But in my experience, at least, when it actually comes out of a lack of knowledge about trans people, then education is a counteractive to that. But when you find the people who are resistant to education, who are willfully ignorant of what it is to be trans, who knowingly put up walls, refuse to engage, they're not just transphobic. The transphobia is an extension of something else, of other things. It is comorbid with many, many other beliefs about themselves, about their children, about the world that are harmful and toxic. And it's why those are the kinds of people who, even when you try to educate them, won't listen. They will decry it as a woke mind virus because that means they don't have to think about it. They don't have to engage. They don't have to listen because they don't want to. Because it's not about knowledge. It's not about knowing. It's not about understanding. It's about control. And if they listened, they might have to give up some of that control. And is there a more toxic parenting instinct than total control over your child, even as they enter into adulthood? I don't know if other people will find this helpful, enlightening. That seems like a little bit of a highfalutin way to put it, but I don't know if people will find this much of anything. But I found it helpful to think through these things. And I thought maybe it might be helpful for other people to hear my thoughts. Thank you very much for listening. Whatever your thoughts might be, assuming that you keep them polite, I do actually moderate my own comments, and I have no problem deleting or blocking people who are harmful, who are excessively rude, who are threatening. As I said, I think people have the right to cut off family members. If you think I'm just going to let some randos run roughshod over my comment section, you clearly haven't been paying attention. But as long as you can keep your comments polite, even if you think I'm off the mark to some degree with this, put your thoughts down below and we'll talk about it. But as always, Patreon is what pays the bills and enables me to do this as my actual job and my living, even if you can't help me out that way. You know the YouTube things, likes and shares and subscribes, but what I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council, and I am just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.
And now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Goddess Elida, Zubin Lafula, Jen, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Oliver B., Melissa Pedersen, Movie Turtle, Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Auntie Kate 808, Andre, Becky Sparks, Claire Wright, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Kasparov, Dave Hall, Quite Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Toku Blahuvian, Adam R.D.L. Taylor, Pal Barabajagal, Mary Mello, Mira G, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. If you want to help me ensure that I can keep these guys fed, as well as the other animals and strange creatures that sometimes occupy my house, check out the rewards on the Patreon. Yeah, hello to you too. Bless you.